Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and well, we've got a really incredible set of source documents to unpack for you today.
We really do. I'm so glad to be here because this material is honestly just profoundly moving.
It is. So let's jump right in. I want you, the listener, to picture a classic ivy-draped classroom. It's 2017 at the Royal Cambridge Scholastic Institute.
Yeah, very distinctly British flavor, right? You can almost smell the chalk dust in the old wood paneling.
Exactly. And standing at the front of this room is Professor Erasmus Cromwell-Smith. Now, normally he's known for being incredibly taciturn, very reserved.
Right, the kind of guy who just reads from a yellowed syllabus and, expects everyone to take quiet notes.
But on this specific day, the script is entirely thrown out, the students are sitting there, and the professor reveals he has just received a terminal brain cancer diagnosis.
God, I mean, you can only imagine the energy shifting in that room. That's a massive, heavy thing to drop on a class.
Oh, totally. And instead of taking a leave of absence or, retreating, he makes two immediate resolutions.
Yeah, and this is where the sources get so fascinating. His first resolution is to treat every single day left as his absolute last.
Which is powerful on its own. But the second one is that he decides to spend his remaining time in that classroom, sharing 50 years of his most treasured lifelong secrets.
He's basically trying to hand them a survival guide for the human condition, and he's using poetry as the vehicle to do it.
Right. It completely reframes the dynamic of a university lecture. He calls this blueprint deciphering the ultimate happiness triangle.
The happiness triangle, I love that term. Because to understand how a man facing his own mortality constructs a blueprint for joy, you really have to look at the psychological framework he lays out.
It's like a masterclass in emotional physics.
That is the perfect way to describe it. Because, well, he doesn't start with abstract, lofty, spiritual concepts. He starts with gravity.
Yeah, he takes his students back to his own youth, and he introduces them to a mentor of his named Justin Morris IV.
Mr. Morris. Now, this guy has such a fascinating backstory in the sources.
Oh, it's wild. He was an antiquarian bookshop owner in Wales, but he was actually educated at Eton.
Right, and he spent his early years living this incredibly lavish lifestyle. India, Melbourne, Cape Town, Shanghai.
But then he loses the family fortune entirely. I mean, completely swept away by his father's poor judgment and drinking habits.
Yeah, so he goes from extreme global wealth to running a dusty antique bookshop in a small Welsh town.
And that's exactly what gives Mr. Morris credibility here. He isn't theorizing about hardship from, some ivory tower.
Exactly. He has empirical data on what happens when the floor literally falls out from under you.
So Mr. Morris imparts the central thesis to the young professor through a poem called The Equilibrist. And the thesis is that our emotional life is identical to a circus performer walking a tightrope.
A thin and narrow, yet incredibly solid wire. That's the metaphor they use.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit for you listening. Think of this wire like a modern suspension bridge.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Right, because from far away, the main cable of a suspension bridge looks like a single fragile line. You think, how can that hold thousands of cars?
But when you get up close, you see it's actually crafted from thousands of tiny, tightly wound filaments.
Exactly. And the source text identifies these filaments of our emotional wire as our feelings, our faith, our friends, and our family.
So the tensile strength doesn't come from one massive, rigid iron bar. It comes from distributing the weight across all those different bonds.
Which makes so much sense, because when a sudden crisis hits, like a terminal diagnosis or a financial collapse, a single iron bar might just snap under the torque.
Yeah, the sheer force of it. But woven filaments distribute the load.
But if your wire is frayed, say you've neglected your friendships or compromised your values, the structural integrity is gone.
Right. You lose your footing. And the sources point out that when you fall into excesses.
Like burying yourself in a 60-hour work week just to avoid reality.
Or, on the flip side, falling into reckless hedonism. Just escaping entirely.
But even if you maintain the wire perfectly, the storms still come. The wind still blows.
Oh, absolutely. And to handle that weather, the professor introduces another of Mr. Morris's concepts, the tiny little flame of resilience.
And I really want to pause on the word flame here, because the sources emphasize its size. It's tiny. It's unwavering and unflickering, but it's small.
Right. We usually think of resilience as this thick brick wall we build around ourselves, so we don't feel pain.
But a wall is static. If a wall gets knocked down, you're just left with rubble.
Exactly. A flame is active energy. The professor is arguing that resilience is essentially a pilot light at the deep ends of the heart.
It's not a roaring bonfire.
No, because a bonfire consumes too much fuel. It eventually burns itself out.
The utility of the pilot light is just its constancy. It simply refuses to go out.
Yeah, you aren't impervious to the wind. You will absolutely feel the cold. But as long as that baseline capacity to reignite is there, you can survive the walk.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of walking. You're up there on the wire, your pilot light is on. How do you keep from falling when life swings you left and right?
Well, the poem introduces the harmonic pole.
The balancing stick that tightrope walkers use, and the professor identifies this pole as love.
Now, here's where the classroom dialectic gets really interesting. Because a student named Liam actually pushes back on this idea.
I love Liam's question. It's so deeply pragmatic.
It really is. He essentially asks, is this stick of love actually a stabilizer, or does it just create its own set of challenges?
Because let's be honest, love is incredibly complicated. It's heavy.
Right. It breaks your heart, it takes up your time, it causes a lot of our emotional wobbles in the first place.
So Liam's inquiry forces the professor to explain the actual physics behind the metaphor.
Yeah, and the physics hold up perfectly. A tightrope walker's pole works precisely because it is heavy.
Right, a long, heavy pole lowers your center of gravity. It physically resists rotational force.
Emotionally, love functions the exact same way. Yes, it's a massive weight, but that weight anchors you.
It gives you a perspective that extends beyond your own immediate self-interest. You're less susceptible to those sudden, selfish impulses that might tip you over.
But, and this is a massive caveat, you have to hold the pole correctly.
Yes. If you swing a heavy balancing pole recklessly, like if your love is possessive or entirely self-serving, it will pull you violently off the wire.
The mass in the pole isn't what saves you. It's the disciplined, purposeful management of that mass.
And speaking of discipline, that requirement sparks another really great debate in the class. A student named Elena challenges the professor.
Right, on the concept of freedom. Because Mr. Morris taught that freedom lies within you.
Which, Elena questions. She asks how inner freedom is even possible when you're on this perilous wire, completely surrounded by external negativity.
The text calls these negative forces the quibblers.
The quibblers, I love that term. The naysayers, the critics, the people just shouting from the ground while you're trying to balance.
Yeah, and I completely see Elena's point. If your environment is toxic, simply being told freedom is a state of mind feels incredibly dismissive.
It feels like telling someone in a burning building to just visualize a cool breeze. It doesn't help.
Exactly. So the professor addresses that by distinguishing between outer and inner liberation.
Outer freedom is trying to control the environment.
Right.
Silencing the quibblers, changing your circumstances.
Which is necessary. Escaping the burning building is step one. But the architecture is incomplete without inner freedom.
And the professor warns that inner freedom isn't just this passive realization, it's an active, highly trained capacity.
It demands a specific type of self-confidence that is only forged through relentless practice.
It's like the difference between a novice on a tightrope and a master acrobat.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Because the novice is terrified of the crowd, right? They're hyper-focused on every single gust of wind.
But the master acrobat performs these impossible feats because they have conditioned their nervous system to trust their own movements over the noise of the crowd.
Inner freedom is that trained ability, decoupling your internal equilibrium from external chaos.
So at this point in the lecture, the framework moves from poetry into pure structural engineering.
Right. The professor literally projects a geometric figure onto the screen. The happiness triangle.
This is his ultimate functional blueprint for a human life.
So let's analyze the architecture of this triangle for you, starting with the base. The foundation is built on 3 interconnected blocks.
Love, equilibrium, and values.
We've established love as the harmonic pole, and we've established equilibrium as staying on the wire without falling into excesses.
So let's look at how that interacts with the third block, values. The sources define values as your spiritual, moral, ethical, and family principles.
It's the bedrock of character. And what's compelling is the causality between these 3 bases. They govern each other.
You really cannot maintain your moral and ethical values if you lack equilibrium.
Right. When a person is panicked or swinging wildly into excess, their values are usually the first thing they abandon.
Just out of sheer self-preservation. Equilibrium provides the stability you need to actually uphold your principles when things get tough.
And conversely, your values act as the calibration tool for your equilibrium.
Exactly. How do you know if you're working too much? Your family principles provide the boundary lines.
If your work is causing you to neglect your family filament on that solid wire, your values sound the alarm. It's a totally interdependent ecosystem.
Once that base is structurally sound, the professor introduces the upper attitudes of the triangle, the action verbs.
Passion, tempo, and awareness.
Passion is the engine. It's the intrinsic drive to find what you care about and execute it.
But passion without a governor just burns out. Which brings us to tempo. I found this to be the most surprising inclusion.
Yeah, we rarely talk about the speed of life as a psychological virtue.
But tempo isn't just about moving fast. It's about rhythm. It's the sustainable pacing of your energy.
If your passion is running at 100 miles per hour, but your tempo is completely erratic, you're going to crash.
Tempo is the gears of the car. It makes sure the engine of your passion translates into forward momentum rather than just spinning your tires.
And the steering wheel, in that analogy, would be awareness.
Awareness is the ability to capture and squeeze every moment, remaining deeply involved in the present reality of your life.
It's the feedback loop. If you aren't aware of your environment, your tempo will be wrong, and your foundational values will slowly erode without you even noticing.
So when you align that solid base with the active top layer, the professor argues it propels you into a state of inspiration.
And he makes a very bold claim here. He states that inspiration is the absolute only source of continuous happiness.
Mr. Morris originally told the young professor that reaching this state turns a person into a life wizard.
A life wizard. I love that. You are no longer just surviving the tightrope. You are actively manipulating the variables of your life with mastery.
All of this complex geometry funnels down into a single, highly practical formula that he leaves with his class.
And it requires a profound inversion of how modern society operates.
It really does. He tells them that the formula for a joyful life relies on abandoning the pursuit of success-driven love.
And replacing it with love-driven success.
That distinction explains so much about modern anxiety. The default operating system is success-driven love.
We subconsciously believe, if I achieve this career milestone, then I will be worthy of love.
Then I will finally be happy. It treats love and happiness as rewards for achievement.
But the fragility of that model is obvious. If you lose the success, if the antiquarian bookshop goes under, or the terminal diagnosis arrives,
The entire foundation collapses because the love was contingent on external factors.
right. So love-driven success reverses the flow of energy.
You start by deploying the heavy balancing pull of love. Love for your craft, your family, the fundamental act of living.
When you operate from that base of intrinsic motivation, you become incredibly robust.
You're willing to endure the failures and the quibblers because your self-worth isn't tied to their applause.
That steady tempo and awareness inevitably generates a higher quality of work. The success naturally follows the love.
But it demands vital energy. The source text refers to this as a person's animus, the active willingness to engage with life.
You have to step onto the wire. You have to focus on giving rather than just acquiring.
It's deeply moving to analyze this framework knowing the context. A man with a terminal diagnosis refusing to indulge in bitterness.
Instead, he spends his dwindling energy outlining the mechanics of joy for a room full of 20-somethings.
But there's one final conceptual shift in the sources that takes everything we've unpacked and views it from a different altitude.
Yes, the professor teaches that while the tightrope feels like a straight line from birth to death, life is actually a series of never-ending circles.
What was will be again. Actions, attitudes, and energy constantly cycle back.
And the shape of the wake we leave behind as we move through these circles is dictated entirely by the structural integrity of our emotional framework.
So as you texture.
Yeah, if your path isn't a straight line, but a continuous spinning wheel, what kind of circle are you actually drawing right now?
When your current tempo, your current values, and the way you hold your balancing pole inevitably loop back around to meet you, will you be proud of the shape you've created?
Because the filaments you weave today are the exact same ones that will have to support you tomorrow.
Check your pilot light, secure your wire, and step carefully. Something for you to mull over as you step back into your day.